Good afternoon. I'm Rob Fleming, the Minister of Education for the province of British Columbia, and I'm grateful to speak to you today from the territory of the Lekwungen people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. As many of you are aware, the federal government announced it will provide $242 million in funding to support school restart plans in our province. And today I'd like to give you more details about what this means for BC's K-12 schools. But before I begin, I want to recognize the incredible work being done throughout our province to ensure kids have a safe, ready, and welcome return to school next week. Schools are going to look different this year. Break and class schedules are going to be different. The layout of classrooms is going to be different. How students enter and exit a building is going to be different. Cleaning services and the emphasis on hand hygiene and personal health will be different. And how we conduct ourselves under the health and safety protocols in a school will be different. All of these adaptations and measures put in place has required a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes. And I want to thank teachers and education assistants who've been in schools getting their classes and lesson plans ready, who've been consulting with their school's health and safety officers so that kids are well supported when they return to school next week. Principals and vice principals and school administration have been exemplary in their communication with families to make sure they know about their schedules, understand learning groups, and what to expect in the classroom when school resumes. Also, a big thank you to school support staff. They're doing everything they need to help reconfigure schools so that they can open and be clean and safe for students and staff. Not to mention school administration staff who've worked tirelessly all summer to develop safe return plans, who've been connecting with parents throughout the province to find out their needs and how best to ensure students get back to learning. All of this work is being done because our province is taking the best science-based public health advice as we plan to welcome students back to school. To support schools during this pandemic, we've provided a one-time provincial investment of $45.6 million in COVID-specific funding to ensure our schools are safe for students and staff. This provincial funding is in addition to the increased levels of funding school districts are already receiving, a $546 million investment of new money in BC's Budget 2020 for K-12 education. The COVID-specific investments have meant that school districts like Nanaimo-Ladysmith, District 68, are able to ensure that every classroom has a sink or wall-mounted hand sanitizer station. They've also purchased electrostatic sprayers to frequently clean and sanitize services for every school, and they've increased their school custodial staff by 25%. The School District 68 has also created a distance learning French immersion program with some of the extra funding that has been guaranteed that is COVID specific for a restart to school. In the Central Okanagan, School District 23, they've also invested in 53 electrostatic sprayers, one for every school. They've purchased 40 handheld units for cleaning buses, and they are supplying hand sanitizer to over 1,000 classrooms throughout their district. They've also purchased 40 hand washing stations for portable classrooms, so every portable in the district has a sink. In Richmond, School District 38, they purchased 1,200 hand sanitizing stations and 55 portable hand washing stations to install in classrooms without sinks using the COVID-specific funding. Richmond is also adding 25 full-time custodians, and more casual custodians are being recruited as we speak. In a district like Surrey, District 36, they've hired 138 additional custodians and 75 additional teachers to support remote learning. This is the kind of incredible work being done to keep schools safe and clean, and I'm only touching on some of the highlights. So once again, I want to thank the school district staff and school leaders for working on these improvements all summer long. To build on this work, we've also been talking with the federal government about the need for more resources for our schools, and we appreciate the federal government's response for British Columbia. Our province's schools will receive up to $242.36 million in one-time COVID-related federal funding for the 2020-21 school year. BC will receive the first half of the payment in September, and funding will be allocated to public school districts based on enrollment. We are initially allocating $101.1 million to public school districts, $7.96 million to independent schools, and reserving $12.1 million for emerging COVID-related issues between September and December 2020. This reserve amount will be allocated for the education sector before the end of December. We will then receive up to an additional $121.18 million in January, which will be allocated at that time. As we all know, BC is a diverse province. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to how districts and independent schools will implement their K-12 restart plans. We saw incredible diversity and innovation when they were posted last week. It's going to look different depending on the needs of each community. As we've seen from school districts' restart plans, we know it is local solutions that work best for individual students and families. And with the support of the ministry, many districts have already developed or are developing additional remote options as reported in their K-12 restart plans. For example, school districts like Vernon, School District 22, and Bulkley Valley, School District 54, Caribou-Chilcotin, School District 27, have developed remote learning options for First Nations students. School districts like Sea to Sky, District 48, are expanding their existing distributed learning programs so they can accommodate more students to learn remotely. Coast Mountain, School District 82, Stikine, School District 87, and North Vancouver, School District 44, are offering remote learning options for immunocompromised students. While Surrey, District 36, Burnaby, District 41, and Vancouver, District 39, are creating a blend of both remote and in-class options. This new federal funding will further support school districts to implement these programs, to do things like hire more teachers and support staff to support students, whether they're learning remotely or in the classroom, to purchase things like more software licenses, more electronic course materials or textbooks, to help supply computers or tablets for families who need them, and to create things like additional Wi-Fi hubs in remote and Indigenous communities and provide internet access for families. We've also developed resources for the education sector to use for mental health and wellness to support kids and staff when we return to school, and districts can spend this money on mental health supports for their students and staff going forward. This funding will also allow schools to expand their health and safety measures, things like improving ventilation in buildings, the purchase of more PPE, the installation of additional plexiglass barriers, and to hire even more custodial and support staff. Every dollar of the federal funding announced will benefit students in BC. I can tell you that districts have already reached out to families in their communities to find out if their child will attend school classes starting on September 10th, or if they need an alternative remote learning option. I know that in my own family, where I have 2 school-age kids, we've heard from our school district about the Safe Return to School plan, and we've appreciated the personal outreach done by school staff to go over the Safe Return to plan and to explain what options may be available. We've heard some positive results from these surveys, these emails and phone calls from school staff to parents and families in places like Langley, School District 35, and New Westminster, School District 40, Cowichan Valley, School District 79, and the Southeast Kootenay. They're reporting an almost 85 to 90% return rate for kids who will be returning to the classroom for in-class learning. And we're hearing this echoed from other districts where they're seeing the majority of kids returning to the classroom. A reminder today for any families who haven't heard from their school by now, I would encourage them to reach out to their school to have those conversations about what school will look like, an explanation, an overview of the safe return to class, and also an overview of what options those districts and schools are providing. As the first week of school approaches, we want staff, students, and their families to feel confident knowing that the school system is doing everything possible to ensure schools are as safe as they can possibly be, just as we have from the beginning of this pandemic. And I'm incredibly grateful for the exceptional team of dedicated educational professionals supporting BC students during these challenging times. And once again, I'd like to thank everyone for your continued flexibility and patience as we get ready to safely accommodate most students back into the classroom full time. And I'm happy now to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. As a reminder to everybody on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. You are limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. Please take your phones off mute. You will not be audible until your name is called. First question is from Camille Baines, Canadian Press.
Hi, Minister. Some parents are concerned that their children will lose their spots, especially in programs like French immersion, if they keep their kids at home from a school, part-time, from a school that does not have any remote options, or even if they choose to do that full-time because someone in the family has some kind of a health problem. What is your response to that? They're saying that school districts are left to deal with that, and the ministry hasn't provided enough information.
Well, I think what we directed districts to do last week when we posted the safe return to school plans for every district, we responded to the school district's request for funding flexibility. We know this is a different school year. Typically, for funding purposes, funding is derived by physically having a student present in the school. We've said for this year, keep kids connected to their local schools. And districts have asked for that. They want to be compassionate and responsive to students. Many districts, I've mentioned some of them today, are doing precisely what you have mentioned, which is to provide a remote learning option to hold a seat while that student is transitioned back into school later in the year. And a number of districts are providing a number of options that match their innovation and background and the kinds of things that they can provide to students and families. So we'll expect that going forward. Obviously, catchment policies are clearly a school district responsibility. There will be some trade-offs and tough choices for them to make because there are some programs that are very well subscribed, but what we're seeing is districts reaching out to families, being flexible, allowing them to have accommodations based on their family circumstances, and that's what we expected. That's what we heard as well in the conversation we had with school district leaders. And I would note that some districts are completing now or have just completed their surveys. They're obviously analyzing those results, and they're using the funding that's just been announced today and the funding that's been announced previously and the funding flexibility that we announced last week to be able to put resources in place so that every child, no matter where they are in British Columbia, is connected to a learning program.
Do you have a follow-up, Camille?
Yes. What would you say to parents whose children are poised to lose their spot? And some of these schools seem to be having a temporary situation where the kids can stay at home, in situations where families have someone with a health condition until January, while others can have their kids home for about 5 weeks as part of the first semester. And then there's all of this uncertainty. 5 weeks is not going to be too long from now. What would you say to them?
Right. So look, what I'm hearing from districts is that they are encouraging students and families to familiarize themselves with the safe operation of schools. Some won't return next week. We understand that. That's why districts surveyed parents to see what their circumstances, what their intentions are around enrollment and registration. We're all living with a degree of uncertainty. That's part of life under this pandemic. Some school districts are going to offer certain transition back to school points in time. I know that the Vancouver School District, for example, has said they'll communicate with parents in December who have had their children involved in a remote learning program to talk about what the rest of the school year will look like. And we're going to be going through the next weeks and months, actively monitoring under the leadership of Dr. Bonnie Henry and our entire public health care system, keeping people safe in every community in BC. Schools will be responsive to family needs as they go forward, and I think as long as I'm seeing districts, and this is what I am seeing, are being compassionate and supportive of trying to keep kids and their families connected to schools, that's what we expect.
Next question is from Richard Zussman, Global News.
Minister, I know you met with Terry Mooring and the BCTF executive yesterday with the Premier, and they have some very specific, in essence, demands around where this money should go. One of them was the point Camille was just making, but the others are around funding for remote learning in every single school district, as well as a commitment to hire more teachers to allow for greater physical distancing. So will this money specifically be used for those measures?
So this funding will be used in different ways by different school districts based on what their priorities are for additional resources for COVID safety. It may be hiring additional teachers and supporting remote learning options where the need for that is great. It may be different in a rural or remote community where the emphasis might be on transportation or investments in a school around safety. That's what we expect, and that's exactly why last week we were very explicit in terms of going out and surveying and directly interacting and communicating with families to determine what the need is. You can't build a program without knowing how it will be used. And we expect districts to continue to show their innovation and leverage their existing strengths on things like providing remote learning options during this very extraordinary time. That's what's happening in districts around the province, but it is very different to look at a community like Burns Lake, for example, and contrast that with Surrey. They're going to have different priorities, but they're going to receive per pupil money that we are directing from the federal government to match the original provincial investment for them to use on health and safety and learning priorities in their district.
Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
I do. One of the concerns that has been sent to me is around parents, and this is specifically in Surrey, but maybe happening in other places, is that they're concerned about what sort of chemicals are being used in the cleaning products. Have you heard these concerns, or what can you say to parents around what is specifically being used in the classroom?
So I have not heard that specifically, but I do know that the school system is highly regulated with professional cleaning staff that have robust occupational health and safety committees that are site-specific in a school, that are district-wide. So the use of approved disinfectants would be guided by the kinds of things that are safe for everybody that would study or work in a school environment. So I'm quite confident that the types of supplies that we've suggested districts invest in that are centrally procured in some cases would meet the best standards for not only disinfection but also in terms of how they're safely applied in a school setting.
Next question is from Maria Weisgarber, CTV.
Oh, hi, Mr. Question again about the amount of money that's going to be made available for public schools at the first installment this fall. I know you've said districts will decide individually what to do with that funding to put towards health and safety, but again, going back to the BCTF's request that the money be used to help ensure smaller class sizes and hire more teachers, could the province not earmark or designate that a certain amount of money has to go towards that? The BCTF has said that they wouldn't rule out going to WorkSafe BC if those smaller class sizes aren't something that becomes a reality with this amount of money we're receiving from the federal government.
Right. So I expect, and I've certainly been hearing reports, that school districts are hiring additional teachers to support remote learning programs as they need them, and I think that will probably be a considerable area of how this money is utilized, and that's good. That's why we are flowing it. But we don't want to be prescriptive, understanding that different districts will have considerably different priorities based on what kind of needs they have. I would add this, though, that unlike perhaps in some other provinces, we are benefiting in British Columbia from record levels of investment, the hiring recently, in recent years, of 4,500 new teachers, and an average class size for kindergarten of 18, an average primary class size of 20, and even high school students, grades 8 to 12, an average class size of 22. In districts where there's a high level of involvement with remote learning programs, it's likely that, and where districts are holding spaces open for kids to return to school, to transition back, it's likely that would result in a further reduction in class sizes. But the conversations I've had with the president of the BCTF and everybody in the sector is that the flexibility of funding will mean that they will be able to hire support staff, teachers, additional custodians, attendance on school buses to support school bus drivers, all those sorts of things that are part of human resources that deliver school safely.
Do you have a follow-up, Maria?
I do. One question that I saw from a parent or an interested party was about whether school administration can sort of make their own policies. For example, mask wearing in schools. Can they make their own policies within their own schools, or do they have to follow the direction of public health?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're a science-based government that has relied on the Provincial Health Office, WorkSafe, the BC Centre for Disease Control to set specific guidelines for different settings in the province. That includes the K-12 setting. Masks are being supplied to every student and staff member in British Columbia. They will be resupplied as we go throughout this year. There will be plenty of masks and other PPE for students and staff to be comfortable in their classroom environments. They are required in certain common areas where students are outside of their learning groups for middle and secondary schools. This is very much in line with public health advice in other provinces and some of the other countries that you've seen with a return to school already, Denmark, for example, Scotland, and other jurisdictions. So we'll continue to rely on Dr. Bonnie Henry and her team for advice on masking and other health and safety measures that may be modified or be added to what are part of the robust guidelines that we have developed the plans in all 60 districts with thus far. But, you know, look, in an individual interaction between a teacher and a student, where both agree it might be more comfortable for them to wear a mask, those are the kinds of things that are going to happen in a school environment. I would expect nothing less, and I think you'll see fairly widespread mask use, especially as they are provided on a daily basis, or a reusable mask will be provided to everybody involved in the school to use those.
Wendy Stuck, Globe and Mail.
Oh, hi. Actually, Maria asked my question, and you kind of, or the question I was going to ask, but I guess a follow-up is, but if we saw one principal in a school that sort of sent out a notice saying, okay, we're going to do something a little different with masks, have a stricter mask mandate, which is something that the teachers union has asked for, are they allowed to do that?
So, as I said in my previous answer, the determination around where masks are mandatory and under what circumstances they should be used is where we're going to continue to rely on science-based advice, and the authority for that is the provincial health officer and the other regulatory agencies around occupational health and safety. But as I also mentioned, I expect there'll be fairly widespread mask use in school settings. But you know, we've heard very clearly from our top scientists that wearing a mask for every single minute of the day in every part of a school setting is not realistic. It's not feasible. But I also expect that there will be you know, schools will want to encourage a mask use for certain situations. I think in any case where people are working up close and where if physical distancing isn't possible, those might be situations where they would use a mask in a one-on-one situation.
Do you have a follow-up, Wendy?
Is there any difference on the guidance for that between public schools and private schools? I've heard that some private schools are imposing different guidelines that differ from the provincial standards.
The K-12 health and safety guidelines are the same for independent schools and public schools.
Next question is from Mary Griffin, Check News.
Hi, thank you so much. Minister, the president of the BCTF said earlier that job action is not out of the question unless its concerns are addressed. And we've heard at Check News from staff who say they won't be in the schools next week. And Maureen tweeted just as this news conference was going again, a thread including about the importance of smaller class sizes to allow for physical distancing across all grades. Is that concern of hers addressed, and are you concerned when you hear about job action?
Well, look, I hope the president of the BCTF's concerns are addressed. We've relied very heavily on professional teachers to work with us on a steering committee to develop the safe restart plans. They've made many good suggestions, many ideas that have been adapted to the guidelines. And I've spoken with Terry Mooring on a couple of occasions just yesterday. You know, her questions were really around federal funding and how it can be used, and obviously her interest was whether it could be used to hire more teachers. I've been clear about that. That's what many districts want to do with the funding. They need to do to support remote learning options, and they will be doing. I heard her say yesterday, and I appreciate this, her focus is on continuing to work with the government using a solutions-based approach, and that's our commitment as well, to work with all of our partners, and the BCTF and others who have been doing a tremendous service to this province in terms of restoring in-class learning after, for some students, a 6-month-long absence. We know that a lot of students will come back into the class having missed a lot of learning and needing social emotional supports to get started and be confident in their schools. And we've created some teacher resources to do that. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of the diverse numbers of teachers that have been involved in the steering committee, advising on very subject-specific safety guidelines around how to safely do music classes and physical education and those sorts of things, and that expertise has been invaluable.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do. Just that I think it was yesterday, Terry Mooring said she hadn't ruled out a complaint to the Labor Relations Board if some of those specifics about the start of school are not addressed. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, what I heard the president of the BCTF say yesterday, which which caught my attention, was that they want to continue working with the government. They're solutions oriented. I understand that they have some messages that they put out. They have to represent a broad, diverse membership, and that's to be expected. But what I am confident is that having worked with the Teachers Federation and local teachers associations to summer weeks and months on opening up schools safely next week, that there may be areas of disagreement. That's to be expected. But in terms of the broad aims of both teachers, the Ministry of Education, unions like QPBC, parent organizations, superintendents, principals and vice principals, the consensus there is that in-class instruction, having a maximum number of students back in a learning environment, learning to live safely with COVID, taking all the precautions necessary to keep schools safe and clean, and to be COVID literate about how to operate in a school. These are broad commitments that all the partners share.
Next question is from Lisa Eusda, News 1130.
Minister, a fairly specific one here first. We're hearing from and have seen one of the school districts in Metro Vancouver that is asking parents to pay $10 for plexiglass barriers between desks. Is this what we're going to see, where families are going to be relied upon to pay for safety measures for their students?
I have not seen that. I don't have the benefit of having my phone in my hand for these instant news reports. But look, I think based on the funding message that I've just delivered here about what are eligible and good expenses and investments to make this a safe school year, plexiglass, I very pointedly mentioned, is something that we know districts have been installing and may have a need to install more. So I would suggest that as an eligible expense of federal money that we're providing to the school districts on top of the provincial funding that's already been announced, they should be using those resources to purchase what they need.
Do you have a follow-up, Lisa?
And you mentioned that teachers, districts are starting to hire teachers to help with remote learning. One of the other things that we heard, or I heard from Terry Mooring, is the overarching concern about physical distance in classes. And I haven't heard you mention that specifically. You've talked about getting kids in class and getting maximum numbers in class, but we've seen these pictures of like a grade 1 class set up with kids sitting essentially shoulder to shoulder in there, and it is very hard for people to understand. And so is there not a mechanism by which, and I'm wondering if this is going to be a sticking point with the Teachers Federation, that you as Education Minister can say we need this certain amount of distance in each class, and that it's not okay for kids to be shoulder to shoulder, or is that just the way it's going to be?
What I would say is that the guidelines are very clear, and they were developed by the Provincial Health Office. They've been explained to the sector. What we're trying to do is limit physical contact between students. There are guidelines that suggest how to properly arrange a classroom to promote safety. We have required, back on July 29th, schools to take every precaution, review their ventilation systems in accordance with the Epidemic Task Force guidelines, to physically reconfigure their schools, to stagger break and recess times, even pick up and drop off times, to deliver programs differently. We saw lots of different examples about how, for example, secondary school education in many parts of the province is going to be delivered on a hybrid model to address some of the concerns that you've just mentioned, and to maximize the ability to safely use a facility. These are good innovations that were brought about by having Dr. Henry and her team in the BC Centre for Disease Control deliver a set of robust K-12 guidelines. We've been in constant contact with a number of other jurisdictions. I mentioned Denmark earlier in this news conference. They have very similar guidelines that we do for September, and including around physical distancing.
Next question is from Graham Wood, Glacier Media.
Hi, Rob. Did you look into building or procuring temporary portables on school sites? If so, what happened, and if not, why not?
Procuring portables, you'll have to remind me, which district or community are you, or school community?
Oh, just throughout the province, just building more portables so that you can separate classrooms.
So I have seen some evidence in my own district of new portables and also learning studios, more permanent structures being built this summer. I know a number of districts have worked on things like outdoor education programs that have built modified outdoor structures, which is good. The federal funding will probably support additional efforts in that regard. I know that schools have looked to use multi-purpose space in their school for delivering different types of classes that may be doing academic subjects in a gym or in a library. So there's a lot of creativity when you get down to the local level about how schools will use the additional space that they have available to them. There's many districts where they do have room to spread out and to optimize how they deliver quality instruction.
Graham, do you have a follow-up?
Right. And do you think should school boards be meeting face-to-face and allow for public comments in a physically distanced manner, a safe manner throughout the school year?
School districts, are you talking about board meetings and that sort of thing? School boards,
yes. Yeah, boards.
They should do it in a way that respects the public health officers' guidelines for public meetings and settings such as what a school board office would be like.
We have time for one more question this afternoon, and that comes from Andrea Ross at CBC.
Hi, mental health resources. This was one of the areas the BCTF was asking for funding. Can you elaborate on how this funding could be spent in that area and what specifically school districts have asked for when it comes to mental health resources so far?
Again, it's different based on different school districts. We have benefited from having a couple hundred more school counselors that were hired as part of some of our investments going into this school year. But it may be that they would look for additional counseling resources. I think teachers have wanted to have some professional development support. We've created a teaching guide for teachers to use around mental health and social emotional learning for students. You heard Minister Darcy yesterday announce $2 million in additional funding for students that have mental health concerns to get them in touch with community hubs and counseling services. It may even involve drug and alcohol services that are an issue with that can be helped with counseling services. So I'd say it's a broad plan. I think that it's a preventative mental health education is a critical part of the school year. Promoting mental health and wellness is going to be one of the benefits of having students return to the classroom, to reduce the isolation from their peers, to be among one another again, and to be back with the structure of a learning program in school. That's critically important for their mental health, and we know that from surveying tens of thousands of parents and tens of thousands of students through our ministry in the BC Centre for Disease Control. We got very specific indication about feelings of isolation, loneliness, and concerns about their own mental health that was part of the absence of school being in place. And we're hoping that with a good, safe restart to school, that kids will start to rebound and feel very confident and be in connection with lots of adults who care about them in their lives, which they've been missing.
Do you have a follow-up, Andrea?
Yeah, and you said that the funding would be sort of spread out throughout this semester, and then the second half being allocated in January. If cases go up, or if there is a second wave, how much flexibility does this funding offer to help school districts revert entirely to remote learning, if that's what's needed throughout the year?
Yeah, and I mean, if we have to move between stages, you know, we have funds to be able to do that, both in our base budget, in our COVID-specific provincial package, and in the federal funding as well. So, to the extent that, I mean, that is contemplated prior to our awareness that the federal funding was going to be secured. And I want to thank the Premier for doing an effective job speaking with the Prime Minister about that. It's all going to additionally help us to be able to manage that.
That's all the time we have this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.